Hello everybody, and welcome to my official video on Silco was right, Terrorism is a poor man's war. This is a video that I've wanted to make for quite some time, but I've never made long video essays like this before that are, well, let's say, taken a bit more seriously. I have made videos like this back when I was younger, but I was always a bit more embarrassed about them looking back. So this is my take to try to go back and at the very least show you guys that I can do things a bit better. Now, I'm not that great at editing, and I don't know what promotional material I'm allowed to use from Arcane, so this is going to be a lot of still pictures. For the most part, this is going to be something that you can listen to while partaking in another activity, and hopefully you can just listen to and get 90% of it. To start with, there was a quote in a KMFDM song. That was an industrial band back in the mid-2000s, and it said, "Terrorism is a poor man's war." That's something that's always stuck with me, particularly because of, well, 9/11 and a lot of things that happened in the Middle East at the time. Terrorism is a poor man's war. That actually comes from a William Blum quote, and to read the whole thing out loud to you, terror is a poor man's war. War is a rich man's terror. Ultimately, all wars will end either in annihilation or at the negotiating table. A terrorist is someone who has a bomb but can't afford an air force. I realize it's a bit of a controversial statement, but it's one that I actually agree with and I would defend if this video was primarily and only about that. But it's not. So far as discussing Arcane, for the purposes of League of Legends lore, I'm going to be using 99% only sources from Arcane. For those of you guys who are watching this video who probably have not played League of Legends, but for those of you who have played League of Legends, you would know that Riot is a company, the people behind Arcane and League of Legends and Legends of Runeterra and all those sorts of things, that company does not have a very good, let's call it, focus. They don't have a central authority on lore, and their canon and what is canon and what's not canon gets changed all the time. There was already a massive retcon where they threw everything out. Since then, they have basically decided to pick and choose story to story what gets to be canon and what gets to be just totally thrown out. Therefore, considering Arcane is a $1 million television show that is a lot of people's first introduction to League of Legends lore, I assume that that lore will not be retconned anytime soon. So if all you've seen is a show, you're going to be doing perfectly fine, okay? I'm going to do my very best to back up everything just from the show. We're going to use primarily quotes between characters and maybe some actions and some things that are from the show in order to show my point. So what is the purpose of this video? What exactly are we talking about? Basically, I'm going to be defending Silco, and I'm going to be saying, to use a meme, Silco did nothing wrong. Now, obviously, I do think he did a few things wrong, but for the most part, I actually think that a lot of the methods he used, and even the violence he uses, comes from the position of an extreme underdog. For Act 1 of this video, I'm going to title it, Zaun does not have the ability to achieve independence through conventional means. Some people look at the end of this series, and they see that Piltover was willing to grant Zaun independence, but that only comes after everything that Silco has done throughout this series. They weren't willing to give that independence to them originally. In fact, the series opens up with a rebellion in Zaun being violently put down by the Piltover enforcers. So, from that perspective, I think if a rebellion is being violently put down with the deaths of the main character's parents, the main character's parents have been killed in this rebellion, so no, I do not believe that a non-violent independence was possible, okay? Now I'm going to read a quote here. This quote will effectively, hopefully, try to say what I'm trying to say, but better. Vander says, "Even with your monsters, you won't win a war against Piltover." Silco says, "I don't have to. I just need to scare them. They won't dare set foot in the underground again." Vander says, "You'll get people killed. For what? Pride?" And Silco, in a shocked way, can't believing that Vander thinks that this is some pride thing for him, says, "For respect, opportunity, everything they've denied us." And I think that about says it. Silco wants the respect, the opportunity, and again, everything that they've denied the people of Zaun. They tried to rebel, they violently put it down. Piltover wants to enforce rules. When they want anything, they send down enforcers. Enforcers that literally can throw people through walls, that have no rules, that have no restrictions. Zaun has no ability to resist the enforcers. If they try to resist, we've seen that Piltover is willing to double down to send even more enforcers to be even more violent to them. Silco is saying, I don't want Piltover having free reign, having free access, having free power over us. In addition, we've seen at the end of the series that they're willing to shut down the bridge and just totally kick Zaun out of the city entirely. The good part of the city, the rich part, the part with the hex gates, the part where you can actually have a future in advance, Piltover has the capability to just say, Zaun, you're totally out of here now. And yeah, I mean, if you were in that situation where technologically you're being left behind and your opportunities are dripping away, and you can just see all your people are living in squalor, then yeah, actually, wouldn't you want to do something about that? Next up, we have Silco saying, the only way to defeat a superior enemy is to stop at nothing, to become what they fear. Silco frequently talks about a superior enemy throughout the whole series, particularly with the previous quote, even with your monsters, you won't win a war against Piltover. We've seen the repetition that no, Zaun will not beat Piltover. In a war, they would be slaughtered. And even with Shimmer, we see, again, even with your monsters, you won't win a war against Piltover. We see at the end of the series, the Shimmer can't defeat Heztech. We see Zaun, even with this huge advantage of Shimmer, that they still can't compete with Piltover. All he's done, as Silco would say, I just need to scare them. And that's all that the Shimmer monsters are trying to do. He's just trying to make himself at least a little bit threatening possible. He's trying to bristle his fur like a cat. He's just trying to look as scary as he needs to be, that maybe Piltover would stop messing with him. At the end of the series, we even see Jace agreeing with this. Silco says, you're afraid. Jace says, I am afraid. Today I got a glimpse of what a war between us might look like. Your people wouldn't stand a chance. The council couldn't care less. I'm trying to save you from annihilation. And that's something that's important. Zaun has no council members. They have no authority. They have no representation. Their part of the city is totally controlled by Piltover. If the council wants to send in the enforcers, they want to use Hextech, they want to weaponize everything and just go brutally massacre Zaun, there's nobody Zaun can appeal to. They don't have a government. Their own government is killing them. Jace just offering them independence is his way of, in his own words, I'm trying to save you from annihilation. Let's be clear, throughout all these three quotes, we've seen that yes, Zaun would be totally destroyed by Piltover in a war. All, once again, to use the analogy of a cat bristling its fur, all that Silco is trying to do is make it look at least a little bit terrifying that maybe he could scare Piltover off massacring his people. Which I think, yeah, that's what he's going for. And I think that's pretty much what this series is trying to say. To use an example, or at the very least in a lack of an example here, Silco does not employ Shimmer in any offensive way against Piltover throughout the entire series. So far as combat is concerned, Shimmer has not been used against Piltover even once. He's not employed operatives. He's not intentionally gotten anyone from Piltover within Piltover killed. Everything he's done has been within a defensive use of his methods. That goes with the whole trying to create fear, trying to scare them out of Zaun. Looking at the actual actions of the series, I think it's pretty clear that, yes, the entire motivation, the entire purpose behind all of Silco's actions, behind everything that he did, he was just trying to get Piltover out of what he considered the nation of Zaun. And we saw exactly why he was trying to do that. A violent suppression of their rebellion. And we can see throughout their talks that the rebellion was there to try to create the nation of Zaun. So we can see they tried to create the nation of Zaun. They were violently put down. We can see when they do anything that annoys Piltover, they can put enforcers down there. They can murder their citizens without any reprise. And so that, yes, I do think, it is my personal opinion, and it is pretty clear throughout the series that yes, Silco is trying to employ defensive monsters in order to scare Piltover out of his city. For Act 2, what I'm going to call Silco wants an independent nation of Zaun, independence from Piltover. We're going to talk about the fact that what Silco's motivations are and what he wants is merely the independent nation of Zaun. A lot of people seem to think that he's trying to grab power or that he's trying to, well, just consolidate control of Zaun for himself. That never really actually is expressed throughout the show, and I think a lot of people just get that idea because they think of him as a traditional bad guy. Time and time again, he talks about the independent nation of Zaun. His motivations are for Zaun, his actions are for Zaun, and he doesn't really ever do anything for himself. So other than just having some sort of holdover from other movies or TV shows, I'm not really sure where people get the idea that he's trying to do anything for himself. In order to prove my point, we're going to go through a couple of quotes. The first one really just leads into a later conversation, but it needs to be said because it gets across that Vander isn't disagreeing with them. To this quote, Silco says, "We shared a vision, Vander, a dream of freedom, not just for the lanes, but the whole of the underground, united as one. The nation of Zaun. Do you even remember? I trusted you, and you betrayed me." Vander says, "What I did to you, I've never forgiven myself. You were my brother." He doesn't disagree with this dream at all. He says earlier, potentially, that Silco's doing it for pride, but he never disagrees that Silco's working towards the independent nation of Zaun. That's actually something that I don't think any of the characters really call into question. The only one who does it is Vi, who's personally affected by all this, and in my opinion, I don't really think we can trust her description of Silco accurately. I think obviously he's caused some issues and she might take issues with that, but I think she also might be scapegoating him entirely for all the issues of the other underground, which are not really his fault, to be honest. To go into the next quote, we have Silco and Vander again, and this is why I said the first quote. Silco says, "I hated you, but you kept my respect until you made peace with them, played lapdog after everything we suffered." Vander says, "I had no choice." Silco says, "Perhaps, but now you do. Shimmer, we have the power. We can finally realize our dream, brother." Vander says, "Look at what you've done. Benzo, these kids. In fighting topside, you'd sacrifice everything that we are. It's not the way. Can't you see that? Kill me if you have to, but please, spare the lanes." Silco says, "You'd die for a cause, but you won't fight for one." Vander says, "I'm just not that man anymore." Now that actual quote right there is exactly where I started to think that maybe there's a lot more to Silco than originally the show gave him credit for, really. It didn't show him in a positive light until this one. You die for a cause, but you won't fight for one. And I'm just going to take a minute to go over that. That's when that really struck for me because, yeah, actually, Vander is willing to die, but he won't fight. I mean, does that really even make sense? So I don't know. To me, just that quote was perfect. I don't really even know the best way to describe it because it basically shows that Vander is just given up. He's lazy. He says, "I'm just not that man anymore." But really, what is he doing? If you literally are going to die, why not at least go down fighting? At the very least, this quote shows that, yes, in the past, Vander didn't believe they had the power to stand up to Piltover. He made this deal. He did play lapdog to them, but Silco is saying, look, now we have the power. We can defend ourselves. We have Shimmer. We have these monsters that we can use to scare them away. That's his argument. He's saying, look, Vander, in the past you had to play lapdog, but we don't have to do that now anymore, man. We can do better than this. And Vander's saying he won't even fight for that. Given the power, given the capability, Vander won't even fight for that. And honestly, I don't really know how to get across that just totally changed my opinion on this whole dynamic. Later on, to show how little that Silco was trying to look for his own personal gain, but rather the gains of Zaun, when he finally hands his deal over to Jace, when he says, "This is what I'm looking for. These are what you have to give us for peace." Although, to be completely honest, I'm not really sure what Silco had to agree to because Jace had shown that they had total superiority over Silco. Silco's Chemtech warriors were swatted aside. He had, even with all this power, with Shimmer, he still wasn't able to beat Piltover. The only real power he had was saying, look, you're gonna have to kill us, and Jace saying, I don't want to kill you, and Silco saying, okay, could we just be independent then? Which, God, really, when you look at it from that message, how could you possibly not side with Silco? Literally, all he's saying is, look, man, don't kill us, just let us have independence. But to read the quote, Jace, after being handed the note from Silco, is reading the note, and this is all Silco has demanded. Free trade routes, blanket amnesty, unrestricted access to the Hex Gates, sovereignty. That's all he asked for. And how can you even disagree with that? They want free trade routes, as in as of right now, Piltover controls all trade out of Zaun, because Zaun is beholden to Piltover. Piltover owns Zaun. That puts Zaun in a very crappy position. You don't have to think about it that much. Blanket amnesty, as in the deeds that have been done, the people that have been killed, he wants to sweep that under the rug and get on with it. And I don't believe that that's a terrible idea. Later on, when Jace says that he can't give blanket amnesty to Jinx, Silco's actually willing to throw himself under the table. So this blanket amnesty is not for himself. He is willing to waive blanket amnesty, but only for himself. I think that is basically the best thing to show that this isn't a power grab for himself. Unrestricted access to the Hex Gates. This goes with the free trade routes. If the Hex Gates give Piltover a totally unsurmountable advantage in trade, then Zaun having access to those Hex Gates is equalizing it. Now, you can make your own argument that Piltover did make the Hex Gates. Does Zaun deserve access to them? But certainly keeping the two nations, or the really city-states, on an equal footing, then Zaun would need access to the Hex Gates to have their last point, sovereignty. If they don't want to be totally beholden to Piltover, then they would need unrestricted access to the Hex Gates. If Piltover could restrict their access and therefore restrict their free trade and therefore restrict all their power, they're not really a sovereign nation. So long as the Hex Gates are under restricted Piltover control, then yeah, actually, they're not a sovereign nation. I honestly can't, my personal opinion is I can't understand where people come from that Silco is trying to make a power grab. That doesn't make any sense to me, and according to what everybody said, and according to all the actions, there's just no cause to think that this is a personal power grab. Okay, and now for Jinx. Jinx is definitely where things get a little bit more complicated to defend Silco, because obviously with the Jinx issue, Jinx has murdered people in cold blood, officers in Piltover. Totally inexcusable. For all intents and purposes, for every definition, yes, Jinx is a terrorist. I don't believe her actual goal is to sow terror throughout Piltover, but definitely that is what happened. And Silco definitely uses the fact that she caused terror, destruction, loss of life. He uses this in order to further his goal. The reason it gets complicated, and the reason that I think a lot of people would look into this and want me to excuse it immediately by saying, well, Silco didn't order it, so it wasn't what he wanted. But he definitely used it, and it definitely furthered his goals, and I'm not sure if he would have gotten his independent state of Zaun without it. Without the death, without the fear, the bombs, the literal terror in Piltover, they might not have felt it at home. It's very easy, as we've seen in recent history, to send your soldiers over, your enforcers over, and to beat the crap out of third world countries. In this case, Zaun being the third world country. When you start dying on your home turf, things get a little bit hairier, and definitely Piltover seemed to care a lot more about Zaun when their own people were dying, because suddenly the issue becomes, oh crap, we're dying. It's not just them at this point. So from this perspective, terrorism is a poor man's war. This is where this starts to become a little bit more sketchy of a topic to discuss. Does Piltover deserve to have their officers killed? Probably not. Did it benefit Zaun, a state that they were oppressing? Yes, it very much did benefit them that Jinx was killing people. So going into Silco, did Silco really do nothing wrong? By not preventing Jinx from killing people, is that his fault? And honestly, yeah. He very much intended. He was mad at very many points. He was mad at Jinx. He reprimanded her, but he didn't stop her from doing these things. It's sort of a situation where he keeps going and saying, "Don't do this, don't do this, don't do this," but he keeps letting it happen. And you really have to start questioning: did he really not want it to happen then? He did have the Piltover enforcers pretty much under control, but not 100% under control. He didn't have control over Jace, and he didn't have control over a lot of situations. He dealt with what he was getting, and with how much of a mastermind, again, you have to remember that Silco is very much critical. He's very analytical on these things. Do you believe that he really let Jinx go free and run around and do all these things, and he didn't want her arrested, he didn't want to turn her in, he didn't want anything to control her, but he knew she was going to keep killing people? He knew that. My argument here is that actually that it did benefit him, and with the control, the brutal repression that Piltover was showing on them, in a lot of ways, this is exactly the controversy that I put in at the beginning of the video. Terrorism is the poor man's war. There was no way that he was going to convince Piltover to cease what they were doing and to give them independence without the Jinx and without her killing people. Do I think Jinx is a good person? No. And I do believe a lot of people excuse the fact she is a literal terrorist a bit too easily. However, given the situation, given the realities of it, is Silco really in the wrong for allowing it to continue to happen? And that is, again, this is the more controversial aspect of this video. That's really why I left it to the last part, because I figured the only people who are still listening to this are the people who are probably a bit more open-minded about all these things. That's really the question. I don't really have a good answer for you, because nobody wants to be the person that says outright, yes, it's okay to kill enforcers from Piltover. Civilians, at the very least, that we've known are off limits. I don't think civilians have been murdered, but at the very least the enforcers have been murdered repeatedly. And Silco is not doing anything to prevent it from happening farther other than pointless reprimanding. He's not, again, ordering his people to do it, but he's not preventing it. I'm not really sure what to say about this one, other than just to repeat my point. Zaun would not have gone free had it not been for the deaths of the enforcers, of the police officers. The last thing with Jinx we're going to discuss is, of course, the Super Mega Death Rocket, which sounds pretty much as dumb as it, well, sounds. The fact that Silco's story ends with this Super Mega Death Rocket, I'm not sure how I feel about that one. But, yeah, so when Jinx gets the Hexite Crystal, Silco wants to make a weapon in order to defend Zaun. Effectively, he wants a weapon that's going to be strong enough to defend Zaun, to scare off Piltover, and finally get their independence. And when Jinx makes that weapon, it's the Super Mega Death Rocket, which she ends up using offensively. But again, to my knowledge, and according to everything we have seen here, agrees with the fact that Silco would just want a defensive weapon, that in a modern sense, when you have nuclear weapons, no one messes with you that much because you have a nuclear weapon. And that's basically what Silco was looking to get. Did he intend to use it offensively? I don't think so. I really do not believe that there was any express intent for him to attack Piltover with it. He was making peace. He wanted the Hex Gates around. He wanted Piltover around. He showed animosity. He didn't like them, obviously. And so the concluding argument here, and this is just going to be a question for you guys, do you really think that Silco had any opportunity to do things differently? You've seen that nobody thought he really had that much power. Shimmer and the monsters it created was the only thing that was really giving him power to try to get an independent Zaun. We see that he was really only interested in independent Zaun. The fact that he didn't control Jinx benefited him, and I'll put forward the question here. The very enforcers that are allowed to mess with Zaun forever, that we've seen once again brutally murder and put down a rebellion, those officers were the ones that ended up dying. Not the same exact officers, but the same establishment. As a concluding argument then, Silco did nothing wrong. Unless he did. But I don't think he did anything wrong. Not really. I think he worked within the means that he had. He worked within the fact that he was a supreme underdog. I don't think death is an enjoyable experience. I don't think people want to die generally. And I don't believe that trying to kill people is a good idea. However, given the rules of the universe, given the universe that we were set up, given this scenario, I don't believe that given a realistic approach to things, that Silco could have done anything differently and tried to get the independent nation of Zaun. Once again, and I think this is the most important thing, is the series literally begins with the brutal and violent suppression. I've said this probably 10 times throughout the video, the brutal and violent suppression of the Zaun rebellion. And I think that really sets this entire thing up in a way that people don't really put two and two together in their head. And I'm going to repeat this point because this is something that a lot of people overlook too. It wasn't as if Zaun and Piltover were equal. The council and all the power was in Piltover. Zaun had no representation. They had no ability to get changes. They had no power. They had no power, zero power. And that is something that is extremely important in this situation. If you give a group of people no power and you repress them and you set them back and you don't let them advance, really, what can you expect to be a different outcome in this situation? So, with all that said, I want to thank everybody for watching. I want to thank everybody for being here. If you made it this far, thank you. I appreciate everybody. Please make sure to subscribe to my Patreon. The link is in the description. It supports me in continuing to make videos like this. If this didn't give you a satisfactory ending, that's because, particularly as we get longer into this video, it becomes more of a sensitive topic. And I'm not sure I want to get canceled over giving too many opinions on this. However, I did want to put out a video on this. So, thank you all, and I hope you all have a great day. Goodbye.